So anyway, I had the student the other day, and like I said, she was spot on with her speed, a good driver. And then all of a sudden, this guy behind us shoots out of his lane and crosses a double yellow line to pass us. And just to note, clearly that's against the law. And then he jumps in front of us and puts the pedal to the metal and just takes off. I look at my student. I said, "Don't worry, we'll catch up to him at the next red light." Sure enough, next red light, he stopped. We come up right next to him. And I got to tell you, it took all my willpower to not get out of my car and go up to his car and give him a piece of my mind. In fact, I kind of wanted to give him a piece of something else too. Uh, Impatience in traffic, and especially when I'm an instructor and you have my student and it says student. Some people, when they say student driver, they're already getting patient. We're doing nothing wrong, but they see the sticker student driver and they already want to break the law and go around us and beat the horn at us, thinking somehow that's going to make my student a little bit more calm. It doesn't. But honestly, it was my student that caused me from stepping out of that car that day. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened in the last years. But I have to be professional. I have to teach them of accepting drivers who are rude. And I have to tell you, I wasn't scared. I was mad. I was angry. And again, if it wasn't for my student in that car, probably someone, maybe one of you, would be bailing me out of jail right now. That's how angry I was down deep. And my student toned down my anger, and they really caused me to let it go. I'd like to say that it goes away and you get used to it. But really, not so much. Again, numerous times each day, I want to pummel somebody because of how they impatiently treat my student. And my anger at times just simmers. You ever been there? And some of us, we don't have a student to keep us at bay with our anger, but we have that simmering anger that's inside of us, and it's simmering. It's still there. It's not going away. In the story of David and Goliath, we see not a lot of anger coming from David. We do see a lot of anger from people around him. One such individual, as we have seen previously, is his older brother, Eliab. And in 1 Samuel 17:28, it says that Eliab, when David came into the camp to bring provisions for his brothers, he heard what was going on with Goliath coming into the valley and taunting the Israelite army. And he talked a little bit. And it says that Eliab burned with anger at him. Now, as I thought about that, I thought, Eliab, you would think, being the older brother, he would have been supportive of David as he arrived at the battlefront. Maybe even a little hesitant, yet still supportive that his little brother courageously stepped forward to take on this giant. Maybe protective, trying to tone David down and get him to see some common sense that this dude in the valley is 10 foot tall and you're just but a teenage boy. And I can understand that. I can understand that if Eliab was like that, after those strategies that he tried with David didn't come to pass, that he might gotten a little angry. Now, maybe the anger toward David was already in his heart, simmering. I'm assuming it had been simmering for some time, waiting for an opportunity to erupt. After all, David was anointed by Samuel to be the next king. Elab, the oldest, the strongest, the biggest, wasn't. How does one stomach that? My little brother's going to become king above me. So like my students, when somebody goes against the traffic laws and gets my students nervous because of their beeping and because they see student driver on my car, uh, and I have so many students that are driving this, they're driving perfect, and my anger erupts. And I have to tell you that I want to go out after those drivers and I want to confront them. And I think that's what Elab must have felt. Not necessarily inside of him, but an anger directed toward his little brother David, just like mine is directed toward this other driver. Let's understand anger. Anger isn't necessarily wrong in and of itself. And the Bible reveals that. There are times to be angry and there are times to express our anger. James 1:19, it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Jesus, our example, he even felt anger at times. Mark 3:5, it says that he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched out his hand and it was completely restored. You all know the verse that says, "Be angry and sin not." In Mark chapter 11, verses 12 to 18, he gives the scenario where Jesus came into the temple and he was furious, angry at these money changers that were making money in the temple that should have been a place of worship. And it says he overturned the tables of the money changers. I mean, let's understand, Jesus went full blown psycho on these guys, flipping over tables. I mean, that takes strength, that takes stamina, and none of these guys tried to stop him because they were scared. And he said, he said, "My house will be called a house of prayer, not a den of robbers." So there is a place to be angry. However, anger becomes a giant when it works its way into our life and begins to simmer under the surface, just as Elab's simmered under the surface. Have you ever cooked? If you've ever cooked and the recipe calls for you to let it simmer for 10 minutes, that means part of the process to let all those ingredients that you've added blend together. And usually when we do that, it tastes real good. But in terms of anger, when we let it simmer and all these flavors blend together, things get really complicated. Our desire for revenge is added. And our desire for what we feel is fair is added. And the desire, quote, "we have to be recognized," is added. And who can forget the idea of a dash of that we're owed something, and a teaspoon of, quote, "feeling of being misunderstood." And we take all those things and we blend them together, and our desires aren't met. We get angry. Partly because another, even including God, hasn't given you the recipe that you want. And the result is anger. Anger emerges in us in a variety of ways. We have all been in this place. I know we all have been. And if you've not, well, I think you're just lying. Because I think we've all been there. How does anger emerge and how does it mess us up? Number one way to know that anger is emerging in us is if you feel angry about something, listen, that never happened. Right? We're angry about something that has never happened. Maybe you thought a friend or family member did something against you, but in reality, he or she never really did. Maybe your anger was wrongly felt. Sometimes we feel angry towards someone else, and sometimes even against God. And it comes to that ultimate question, why? Why did you do this to me, God? And it's a weird thing. We replay that over and over and over again, and we think something must have gone on, something must have been said, and we get ourselves all up in a tizzy because of what we think must have gone down. And the anger is based on our own thoughts, our own assumptions, and often we have never sat with that person. We've never confronted them. We've never given them a chance to clear the air. Instead, what happens is our anger simmers. It's simmering. Now, with that said, there are those of us who are accused of saying something or doing something. And what we need to do is be patient with the person that is making the accusation against us. Because maybe we've never said anything or never done anything, but we're being accused because they're angry and that anger is simmering, and then we got to give them time to turn the heat down. And we need to do that when that happens without attitude, because so often we get accused of something we haven't said or done because of their assumptions, and we respond back with an angry attitude. That doesn't help anything except pour more fuel on the fire. So we need to affirm them and let them know the truth. Hey, I didn't say this, I didn't do that. And if you care about this family member or this friend, you owe them that. And you want to encourage them, not inflame them, not throw another log on the fire that's already burning. Give them a chance to cool down. So one way to know that anger is emerging is that if you feel angry about something that never happened. Another way, anger emerges is that you have a genuine reason to be angry, but express it in the wrong way. Elab had pent up rages, pent up anger that was simmering. And when he finally lashed it out, it probably did some damage. And that's what happens with us. Sometimes we have a right to be angry, but instead of approaching that person or even God, we hold it in and we hold it in and we hold it in, and then it finally explodes. And the explosion will usually do more damage than good, because an explosion usually results in unrestrained words, and we let it all out without restraint, and rarely is love attached to it. And what are we called to do? We're called to speak the truth in love. The love part is often the missing ingredient. And I've heard people say, well, they needed to know the truth. Yeah, but in love, right? That's what we're told. And most often, when we don't attach love to that, it ends up in an explosion. So, anger's emerging when you feel angry about something that ever happened, when you express it in the wrong way. And this leads to my third point. You have rightly felt anger, but you fail to express it. This is different than expressing it in the wrong way. Here, you don't express it at all. And repressing your anger, it not only hurts the person, but it hurts you. It's actually, we have medical journals that say there's huge health risks with stuffing it down and not expressing it. And it really truly is a destructive thing in our life. It's like a pressure valve. We release the pressure and things subside. But if you never release the pressure, what ends up is we explode. Have you ever done that? Someone really wronged you in some way, but you never said anything to them. And the pressure's building. The pressure's building. Every time you're with them, the pressure's building. You're simmering. You're simmering. You're short of a boil, but the boil is coming. And you continue to push it down and not express it, even if it's God. I find that often God is my pressure valve. And when I go to him and I talk to him about it, whether it be somebody else, whether it be himself, and he releases that valve, he lets the pressure out. And I think more clearly. I have a little bit more love in my heart. He and I, we have some intense conversations, some angry conversations. I don't always use nice words when I'm talking to him because I let it all out. But here's what I know. He always listens to me. He lets me blow off steam, and then he reminds me of who he is and who I am. So how do you overcome this giant called anger? How do you experience the victory that Jesus has already won over it? It begins by this. Number one, let's recognize that lasting change seldom arrives instantaneously. More often, God morphs into your life little by little. We often want things that we're angry over to diminish immediately. And that does happen on occasion, but most often change happens over time. And I stress that it happens over God's timetable, not ours. If we can't see that, if we can't allow that, then we begin to operate on our timetable. And most often, patience, it's not in our DNA. And so the pressure starts to rise because our pressure relief valve has not been pulled. Secondly, the key to real change in our spiritual life is to consistently fill yourself up with faith. Now, what do I mean by that? To fill your mind with trust, to know his word, to read his word, to be in his word, understanding that because of his love for us and his grace for us, we can go to him and trust what he says. And I think the more we consistently fill ourselves up with him and his word, our faith begins to build. And how do we do that? Well, again, number one is continually, and I stress the word continually link up with what Jesus is doing within you. But that will require you to be in his word, to read his word and substitute your anger with the truths that you find there. But the key word is consistently. You read a Bible verse once a week, that's going to be tough. You're in the word on a regular basis, then God can speak with you. And often that's what he's going to do. He's going to talk with you in conversation through his word. Sometimes we think we close our eyes, we pray, and we're going to hear this this voice in our head that's God speaking to us. Now, some of you might, and that's awesome. I don't. What I have to be is in his word, and in his word is how he speaks to me. And it's clear. When he talks, it's right there, black and white. I can't argue with it. So continually link up with what Jesus is doing, and you'll be in his word. Substitute your anger for the truth you find there. Number 2, replace the angry conversations you're having in your mind. And we do that, right? We do that. We have arguments in our minds. We had conversations in our minds. So replace the angry conversations you're having in your mind with prayers for the people that you felt or feel have done you wrong. Jesus told us to pray for those who do us wrong, to pray for our enemies, those who persecute us. And you know what? It works. It softens our hearts toward them. Matthew 5:44, that's what Jesus said. Pray for those that do wrong to you. Pray for those who persecute you. But he doesn't go on and at least not in that verse, and tell us that it softens our hearts. It does. So replace the angry conversations you're having in your mind with prayers for those people that you feel have wronged you. And it helps in this regard to remind yourself and me, if you think I'm angry, remind yourself that you, now hear me, you aren't perfect either. God forgave you of all your wrongs so that you can forgive others. God made peace with you through Jesus on the cross. So when you get angry, well, rally back at the cross. Rally at the bottom of the cross. Understand that God is your avenger, and he's also freed you to make peace with other people. Recognize that he did for you, and what he did for you is greater than anything anyone can do against you. By Christ's power, it's possible to forgive those with whom we are angry and release the pain that's poisoning our lives, that's simmering in our hearts. The 4th thing is, it's important to remember that you are a son or daughter of God. And we need to remember that, and we need to, secondly, remind ourselves of this fact daily. You may have been rejected by others. They may have made you feel insignificant. But in God's eyes, you are loved. You are safe. You are secure. You are significant. And we need to let Jesus's voice speak above the others that are roaming in our minds and trying to be heard. God made peace with you through Jesus on the cross. So when you are angry, rally around the cross. Understand that God is your avenger, that he's freed you. Recognize what he did for you. And again, it's a greater thing than anybody can do against you. And it is called grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. And the 5th thing, in the end, taking down the giant of anger is really about letting go of control. And this is a tough one for me. I get revved up when those drivers cut off my students. I mean, I'll let you know. I even went back to one neighborhood where the car cut us off after I dropped the student off. I was looking for the car. I was that angry. Seriously, you thought you had a calm, mild-mannered pastor. No, you don't. You have a flawed servant of God, and he knows it. So, what do we intend to do? Do we do as Elab did? Focus on the bad that we feel was done to us? Do we allow the anger to simmer in our hearts? Do we make sure that we know the facts, which often we don't? Do we hang on to that anger? Or do we do what David did? David did, and listen to me, chose to focus on God rather than the people that have wronged him. I mean, I don't see him reacting to Elad at all. And as a little brother, my older brother's chastising me. I can see me mouthing off back to him. But we don't see David doing that at all. And he chose to step forward in God's power. And that's what he's calling us to do. Now, the key word is he chose. We choose to be angry. We choose to nurture that emotion. We choose to feed it memories and emotions that cause all kinds of complications in our minds and in our hearts. We choose to stew on the aroma of that anger. We choose to let it simmer. Or we choose to stew, to simmer on the aroma of when God delivered us from the bear and the lion. And that's what David did. God delivered him from the bear and the lion, and he knew that God would deliver him from this giant called Goliath. God has delivered you and I from various different things, especially from death to life. And so we choose to rely on him, remembering where he's brought us from. So David, with great faith and confidence, he went forward knowing who had his back. How much does Jesus have to say to us about this? That he gave us the cross to remind us it's okay to get angry, but chill out. I have your backs. We have his grace. We have his love. What more do we need in light of our failures, our indecisions, our uncontrolled anger moments? We need to think of his grace and love. The cross is our symbol for that. What an amazing love we have, and how it can go into our hearts and minds and change how we interact with everybody else. The giant of anger needs to fall. We all struggle with it, but it's right there. And he gave us an example, and he gave us a symbol, and that is the cross. And we're going to share communion. We're going to have a video first, and then we'll share communion together.